Welcome back to JComX, everyone. It's time for another episode of What Have I Been Playing in 2024. This is a series that I'm doing to bridge the gap between my regular uploads, which require a lot of scripting, editing, and animation, while also giving me the chance to talk about some games that I've been playing. Consider this something of a JComX recommendation guide for the Nintendo Switch. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the games. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. We're starting off with a Nintendo Switch all-timer here. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has basically been around as long as the Nintendo Switch. As one of the highest-selling games, if you own a Nintendo Switch, it's likely that you own Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and even if you don't own it, you probably have still played it. But today, I specifically want to focus on the DLC Booster Course Pass, which is what I've mostly been playing in 2024. Over the past couple of years, Nintendo has slowly been drip-feeding the DLC, whether it be characters or courses, and now everything is finally here. With a total of 8 new characters and 48 new courses, the DLC Booster Course Pass has effectively doubled the amount of content in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. That means there are 96 total courses, and for my money's worth, that makes this Mario Kart the definitive Mario Kart to go to. Me and my friends have constantly come back to this game over and over because it's just such an easy game to pick up and play. The DLC also brought back some of my favorite characters from the franchise, Petey Piranha and Diddy Kong, as well as fan favorites like Funky Kong, Pauline, and Birdo, and even some weird ones like Wiggler and Toadette Peach. And the final inclusion is Kamek, who was supposed to be included all the way back in Mario Kart 64 for the Nintendo 64, but only finally made his racing debut in Mario Kart Tour, which I haven't played a lot of. Speaking of Mario Kart Tour, a huge chunk of the courses that were brought into this DLC are from Mario Kart Tour. Things like Paris Promenade, the New York Minute, Berlin Byways, and Bangkok Rush. While these courses offer a lot of variety, and it is cool that we're getting some Mario Kart Tour representation in the official mainline Mario Kart series, these are my least favorite courses of the whole bunch. When I play Mario Kart, I want to play in the Mario universe. I don't want to be playing in, like, New York and Rome. But I can't be too harsh because some of these courses are really cool. Luckily, the rest of the DLC Booster Course Pass is full of fan favorites that have been brought back, as well as some new original courses. Things like Rosalina's Ice World from the 3DS, Waluigi Pinball from the DS, DK Summit from the Wii, and one of my personal favorites, DK Mountain from the GameCube. There are even some really impressive remade tracks that are brought back, like Sunset Wilds, Calamari Desert, and Snowland, with probably the best, or at least my favorite, being Bowser's Castle 3 from the Super Nintendo. This course is freaking awesome. They completely knocked it out of the park in my opinion. And then finally you have the totally original tracks. Merry Mountain is this Christmas-themed level which just looks fantastic and totally puts you in the holiday spirit. Piranha Plant Cove finally gives Petey Piranha, one of my favorite characters, his own course. The music in this level slaps, and I love all of the little Petey Piranha Plant statues. This level rules. And probably my favorite course on this whole DLC, if not the entirety of Mario Kart, is Yoshi's Island. This level is absolutely amazing. It is a love letter to all things Yoshi's Island, which was one of my absolute favorite games growing up as a child, and I still love the game. It's one of the best 2D platformers with an incredible art style, and a pretty good difficulty curve to boot, and this track just feels so nostalgic. It's kind of based off of the overworld map in Yoshi's Island, but it also feels like it encapsulates all of the little environments in the game too. It starts off in the plains with the chain chomps jumping around in the background, with some of the classic enemies like Shy Guys on stilts and a piranha plant hanging from the ground, and these weird little fat birds with pants. And then you leap off into an underwater segment, which is reminiscent of the third world of the game, which is a swampy, jungly type area. It then takes you into a fortress, of which there are many in the game, filled with these crystals that are all over the place in the cave levels of Yoshi's Island. And finally you ascend a snowy hill up into the clouds, which is the exact same kind of a path that you go on in Yoshi's Island. It caps it all off with a huge jump that brings you back to the beginning area, but you can hit into this flying question mark cloud thing that will create a bridge that you can ride all the way to the goal ring. It's all of the little details coming together that just make this my absolute favorite course in the entire DLC Booster Course Pass. It's absolutely amazing. They changed the sound effects, the theme music, and even the final music when you win the race to all reference Yoshi's Island. It totally works for me. So it goes without saying, but I love the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe DLC. It's something that for a long time I had actually been wanting. I didn't want a new Mario Kart game, I wanted more DLC for this Mario Kart game, because there was already so much content, and now there's just 96 courses. There's so much variety in this game. You can come back over and over again, and no two playthroughs will have the same course selection or same characters. As one of the most popular games on Switch, you probably don't even need me to recommend this, but I love Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and the DLC Booster Course Pass is worth it in my opinion. $20 for an entirely new Mario Kart game, essentially. The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. Now, right off the bat, I have to admit that I have not beaten Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. In fact, there's a huge chunk of the map that I haven't even touched. I spent most of my time in this game so far exploring the Hebrew region, in and out. So this is just my personal thoughts from what I've played so far, and I might have to do an update video later on with my full thoughts on the game after I've completed it. So when this game was first announced, I was absolutely stoked. I felt like because of the size of the Breath of the Wild map, there was still a ton of potential to flesh out this world, with new locations and more locales, and so I was ready for it. And they added a bunch that I wasn't expecting. Spoilers ahead if you haven't played it and you want to keep yourself totally spoiler-free, just skip this next part because I'm going to go into a little bit of spoilers. But in addition to the Sky Islands, they also added a whole underworld to this whole game, which essentially doubles the entire Hyrule map. It's incredible how much they put into this game. So if you liked Breath of the Wild, you are going to love Tears of the Kingdom. It's Breath of the Wild on steroids. It's just more of that game. Which is why I kind of fell off of the game. I sunk hundreds of hours into Breath of the Wild. I spent a ton of time in that game, and I absolutely loved it. But when I started playing this game, I realized that it hadn't been a long enough time since playing Breath of the Wild for me to really crave more of the game. I absolutely enjoyed the time that I spent in this game, probably 30 or 40 hours at least, and while the story is new and exciting and I want to see how the story concludes, going through the main sections of Hyrule felt a little bit like a retread. And I'm the type of person who likes to jump from one game to the next, trying new different experiences. I might be on the ADHD spectrum, I probably am, but regardless, it's hard for me to stick with one game for so long. So after a while, I ended up getting distracted by other games and Friday night games and all of that other stuff, and I haven't really come back to the game in a while. It's not because it's a bad game, this is fantastic. Again, especially if you liked Breath of the Wild and you just want more of that, this is that. In fact, when I started capturing footage for this video, at first I was like, we're back here at this game again, but soon enough I was totally sucked back in. The quality of the game is awesome, and after playing for about 10 minutes or so, you just want to keep playing more and more. Breath of the Wild kind of rejuvenated open world games for a little while there, so the quality speaks for itself. I don't even feel like you need to have played Breath of the Wild before to play Tears of the Kingdom. If you haven't played either of them, then this is a totally worthwhile jumping on point. I may be wrong because I haven't completed the story, and I'm sure there are references to the previous game, but ultimately the game treats it like this is your first time entering this world. You don't need to have played Breath of the Wild to play Tears of the Kingdom. So keep in mind that I haven't totally beaten this game, but Tears of the Kingdom is an awesome game for the Nintendo Switch. The Nintendo 64 Switch Online. So I am cheating a little bit with this one because this isn't really a game, it's an online service, but it includes a bunch of different games. One of the big sticking points of the Nintendo 64 Online is the cost. When this service was first announced, there were only a few Nintendo 64 games, and it was $60. There were a few add-ons for like Splatoon and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but $60 was still a steep price for this service. But as time has gone on, they've added a ton more Nintendo 64 games, they've added Animal Crossing DLC support, and they've added Game Boy Advance games to the service, so you get a lot more value for your buck. If you can gather together 7 of your friends, the price is especially worth it because you can split the cost of a family plan and it ends up being about $10 for a whole year. But I do understand that for a lot of people, budget is going to be an issue with these games. But if you can swing it, I highly recommend it because this is another service that me and my friends will constantly go back to. We are millennials, so we have a lot of nostalgia for the Nintendo 64, and a lot of these games have not exactly aged the most gracefully. I've seen a lot of the younger generations playing these quote-unquote masterpiece games and not really feeling the same way about it as we do, but I think if you're willing to play these games on their own terms, then they are an absolute blast. Sure, GoldenEye 007 does look like ass these days, and the controls are janky as hell. It was one of the pioneering first-person shooters on a console, so you have to give it a little bit of leeway. But if you and your friends are all wrestling with the same janky controls and graphics, it is actually a really fun time to just get together and play some GoldenEye. When the Nintendo 64 came out, it was one of the first consoles that offered 4-player support built right into the console. Prior to this, most of the consoles only included 2 controllers, so the Nintendo 64 kind of ended up being the party machine with so many multiplayer games like Super Smash Bros., F-Zero X, Mario Kart 64, Star Fox 64, and a whole bunch more. There are some notable essential classics that are missing from the service, like Donkey Kong 64 and Super Smash Bros. 64, but most of the essentials are here. Single-player games like Super Mario 64, Kirby 64, Yoshi's Story, Paper Mario, and even third-party games like Perfect Dark, Turok, and one of my personal favorite games of all time, Banjo-Kazooie. So there's a ton for Nintendo 64 Online, especially if you're a boomer like me and you love the Nintendo 64. If you're interested in the system at all and you can swing the budget, then I highly recommend the Nintendo 64 because this is one that me and my friends play all the time. One other little caveat that I will add, playing these games with the wireless Nintendo 64 controller is almost a must in my opinion. I do realize that adds significantly to the price, and a lot of these games really don't require it. You can just play it with your regular Switch controllers, but these games were designed to be played on a Nintendo 64 controller. Playing GoldenEye with a modern Switch controller plays like shit, but playing it with the original Nintendo 64 controller feels a lot better. And the same goes for things like Sin and Punishment and even Banjo-Kazooie. So keep that in mind as you're playing these games as well. If you can get your hands on a reasonably priced Nintendo 64 wireless controller, then I highly recommend playing these games. If not, then you might have a little bit less fun with some of these games. A lot of the games will be just fine. Pokemon Puzzle League, Mario Kart 64, even Super Mario 64. Those games will probably all work absolutely fine, even without a Nintendo 64 controller. So it definitely doesn't prevent you from having fun with the service, but it's just something to keep in mind. Game Boy Advanced Switch Online. I know, I'm cheating again by adding an entire service rather than just a single game, but since the Game Boy Advance and the Nintendo 64 services are bundled together, I feel like I need to talk about it. And having Game Boy Advance games on the Switch is freaking awesome. Of course, this allows you to play classic Game Boy Advance games, which, even though I grew up with a Game Boy Advance, there's a ton of these games that I haven't played. I haven't played Metroid Fusion, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, and this is actually the first opportunity I've had to play the original Fire Emblem, which I've been having a blast with, by the way. But in addition to allowing you to play all of those games, this service allows you to play multiplayer Game Boy Advance games for one of the first times since the Game Boy Advance was released. You and your friends can hook up your Nintendo Switches and play Mario Kart Super Circuit, or the multiplayer version of Mario Bros. In Super Mario Advance. This is an underrated mode that me and my friends had a blast playing while getting this footage. This is probably one of my favorite ways to play the original Mario Bros. Because the controls just feel so much better than the original game. But you can also play stuff like 4 Swords with your friends on the Nintendo Switch, without having to have 4 Game Boy Advances and 4 link cables. As long as you and your friends have the Switch and the service, then you can hook up and play. It's probably one of the most accessible ways to play multiplayer versions of these games. That does require all of you to have a Nintendo Switch and the service, so the price is a sticking factor. But if you do, then this is absolutely awesome, and if you haven't tried it, then you're doing a disservice to yourself. The Game Boy Advance service on the Switch Online is absolutely a huge recommendation for me. These are some of the all-time classics, some of the first times these franchises made their way to mobile, like Mario Kart and F-Zero, and it also has some titles that you probably have never played, like the Starfy series, which they just added to the service. Unfortunately, they haven't added Ruby, Sapphire, or Emerald to the service, which is probably one of the games that most people had a Game Boy Advance for in the first place, so that is unfortunate. But this gives you a chance to play some of the other awesome offerings on the Game Boy Advance. So if you haven't tried the Game Boy Advance online service, I highly recommend it. And one of the final games we're going to talk about is one of the most recent games on the list and a complete surprise to me. Bakeru, specifically the Bakeru demo that was just released to the Nintendo Switch. The full game has not been released yet, so these are just my thoughts on the demo itself. What I played of the demo made me absolutely stoked for the full release of this game. You play as the eponymous Bakeru, who's actually a tanuki disguised as a human, and you play through a variety of different types of levels. You've got traditional action platforming stages, flying stages, and even giant robot battle stages, which is probably one of my favorites that I played in the demo. But one of the huge appeals for me is that the platforming and overall gameplay is extremely reminiscent of some of those older style of platforming games like Banjo-Kazooie or Sly Cooper or Crash Bandicoot. The main gameplay gimmick in this is that you have 2 taiko drumsticks, and you use the left and right triggers to smash enemies all over the place. The game feels absolutely incredible to play, and I had a blast playing through it. The other huge draw is just how Japanese this game is. You're playing through all of the different prefectures of Japan, and I believe that you're fighting notable legendary figures from Japan Japanese mythology, which is just such a freaking awesome concept. And this game exudes Japanese culture. So if you're a massive weeb like I am, then this game is tailor-made for you. It's a 3D beat-em-up platformer with taiko drums and Japanese aesthetic. It's absolutely incredible, and I am super stoked for the original game. And not only is it going to be on the Nintendo Switch, but it's also coming to Steam. So all of my PC viewers out there, you can totally play this game as well, and I highly recommend checking out the demo. I am stoked for Bakeru, and I want to get the word out because I haven't seen enough people talking about this game, but so far, it is absolutely fantastic. And that's going to do it for this edition of Games I've Played in 2024. Make sure you stay tuned because I've got more episodes of Games I've Played in 2024, as well as a brand new Friday Night Games that I'm hard at work at. You can catch it all right here on JComX.